Hello, folks. Welcome back. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. In the 1980s, President Reagan vetoed a sanctions bill against South Africa, preferring to stick to his constructive engagement approach in dealing with the apartheid government of South Africa. Reagan vetoed a bill on September 26, 1986, calling it economic warfare and alleging that it would mostly hurt the impoverished black majority and lead to more civil strife. He offered to impose sanctions via executive order, and he was roundly criticized from leftist center political circles. Congress overrode the president's veto and applied sanctions on South Africa. The Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986 was a law enacted by the United States Congress that imposed sanctions against South Africa and stated 5 preconditions for lifting the sanctions that would essentially end the system of apartheid. Now, the aim of Congress was to force South Africa to abandon racially discriminatory laws. Let's fast forward to 2025, where the majority black rule, the ANC has implemented 142 race-based laws and infected every aspect of life with race-based policies that openly and unashamedly discriminate. Only this time, it is a small minority who are the victims of the state. Would the United States rise to the occasion to place sanctions on a government that does this? Given the ANC has been erecting this racial discrimination regime for over 3 decades, it seems unlikely that sanctions would come now as a consequence of racial laws, even with the expropriation without compensation law recently enacted. Politicians in South Africa's parliament, virtually every media outlet, social media warriors, and captured wealthy segments of business and agriculture in South Africa have joined a loud chorus roundly condemning President Trump for his February 7th, 2025 executive order suspending future foreign aid for South Africa and offering prioritized refugee resettlement for Afrikaners who are victims of unjust racial discrimination. What is shocking are the comments coming out of South Africa where either those commenting are incapable of understanding modern standard written English or are simply disingenuous for domestic political gain in order to curry favor with the ANC-led government, or frankly, simply dishonest. The order is not solely about the mistreatment of racial minorities, yet the focus in South Africa is on how Trump misunderstands what nil means. For the record, folks, he understands it means zero. Or that Trump has offered refuge to whites. That is not what he did. Or that he's invited only farmers. Also false. Farmers are not even mentioned in the executive order. Claiming that Trump is intruding in South African internal affairs. Also false. Trump is ending future foreign aid. Ironically, the constant whining from the political left and academia goes along the lines that racist neo-colonial Western nations seek to influence African states by providing foreign aid. So Trump is withdrawing it. Now we're being accused of trying to influence internal domestic policies by taking the aid away. You can't have it both ways. Trump is also accused of pressuring South Africa to change its laws. This is false. Trump made no demands in his executive order and is not offering to restore aid on any conditions whatsoever. South African elites fail to focus on the inclusion of South Africa's stance on Israel in the International Court of Justice, and more importantly, the ANC's cozy relationship with Iran, including its nuclear cooperation. This and a long list of other egregious anti-America and its allies' ANC actions are why Trump issued the order, not the racial discrimination of minorities. The level of disdain and disrespect the ruling ANC has openly and privately displayed towards the United States is shocking and has been increasing. Trump has taken no punitive measures against South Africa. Rather, he has only addressed internal U.S. issues, cutting our budget deficit and addressing whom the U.S. will allow to enter under our existing legal framework for refugees. These are internal American matters. As South African elites complain about non-existent sanctions, Trump pressuring South Africa and intruding into South Africa, they're not reading the room and completely missing the point, either intentionally or out of ignorance. This constant barrage of insults hurled at the generosity of America and Donald Trump could very well soon lead to the sanctions that the elites today bemoan. What would be the impact of those sanctions today? Well, first up would be the loss of duty-free access to the United States market via the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. This could be devastating for agriculture and the automotive industries in South Africa. However, this is not a sanction, but rather suspension of a generous benefit for which South Africa no longer actually qualifies. The incorporation of expropriation without compensation violates the tenets of AGOA, and therefore South Africa should have been suspended already. Tariffs would come next. Now, Trump has already threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS members for their attempts to undermine the U.S. dollar in international trade. So these tariffs may be coming regardless of U.S.-South Africa bilateral ties. Or Trump could impose additional tariffs beyond his recent reciprocal tariffs order, which is going to raise tariffs on some South African goods. Next would come financial and travel restrictions for key government officials, followed by actual sanctions on South Africa. So what would genuine sanction at Pretoria affect? Two-way trade is approximately $20 billion annually, with South Africa running a trade surplus with the United States, as opposed to its trade with its number one partner, China, where it runs a massive deficit. South Africa's already lost $500 million average annual foreign aid as a consequence of these actions working against U.S. national security interests. Sanctions could cost the mining industry annual sales of $430 million, or 4% of South Africa's mineral exports. Reportedly, over 600 American corporations operate out of South Africa, responsible for over 400,000 jobs in South Africa alone. Never mind the impact of these corporations that do business throughout Africa. Sanctions that ban doing business in South Africa would, in fact, be devastating. American companies, if they're blocked from doing business in South Africa, would have to close shop, and it would cost South Africa far too many jobs. In 2022, 262,183 American tourist arrivals came to South Africa. Now, using a conservative estimate of just $200 per person per day for only 10 days, which is usually far shorter than these trips are and far less than people spend per day, that would be at least $2,000 spent in South Africa per arrival. Now, this wildly conservative estimate comes out to over $524 million annually. Most likely, that figure is probably 3 times that. South Africa can afford that. Often overlooked would be the fallout for remote workers. Thousands of South Africans work for American companies doing remote work from South Africa, with their employer back in the States, not operating in South Africa. Sanctions would likely ban this practice. The harm would be incalculable and disproportionately impact minorities who cannot find employment in South Africa owing to racist laws and quotas. Sanctions would also lead Washington to not support South Africa in international fora, like the World Bank, which Pretoria just approached for a $1.5 billion loan. Now, the U.S. is the most influential and largest vote holder in the World Bank. So imagine how that's going to go for that loan. Cumulatively, these potential sanctions would devastate South Africa. In the 1980s, the National Party was able to successfully work around sanctions in no small measure because of its resiliency, its infrastructure, its technology, and its highly efficient workforce, and because of a few external friends like Israel also helping. But that's not the case in 2025. With collapsing rails, highways, ports, the worst ports in the world, infrastructure collapsing, electricity, a joke, South Africa does not have the resiliency to overcome sanctions. And it will not get the help that the leftists seem to think BRICS will be providing. If BRICS was going to help South Africa, China would have stepped in a long time ago to provide the $400 million a year in HIV assistance the United States has been providing since 2003. So keep pushing Donald Trump, and you'll discover the acronym around, find out, really is all about. This is not a wise course of action. Sending a diplomatic team to Washington to explain to President Trump how he misunderstands that nil doesn't mean zero and that the government will not abuse this law to pressure its political opponents, that's just insulting. If you think that's going to change Trump's opinion and the U.S.'s position vis-a-vis South Africa and U.S. bilateral relations, you're really, really unable to read the room. So let's hope the sanctions aren't coming. It would be devastating for South Africans. It would be a minor annoyance for Americans, but a truly devastating situation for South Africa, and would have far greater impact than any sanctions had in the 1980s, because South Africa is not sanction-proof. It is ripe for the punishment of sanctions. And let's hope it doesn't come to that. What say you, South Africa? Cheers.